Hello, welcome to Grant Writing for Success. This presentation is all about your bid writing. So it's going to look at creating a project. It's going to look at what funders fund. It's going to look at why you are able to demonstrate the need for such a project. And at the end, we will look at some of the more kind of common elements of what you would put in a bid. This will not guarantee success. Success is never normally guaranteed, but you'll kind of increase your knowledge base in thinking about what funders might want and how you can best write that bid to give yourself the best opportunity to get your project funded. So let's dive in. So as I just mentioned before, this slide gives you a bit of a rundown of some of the things that we're going to be looking at. So as I mentioned, understanding the need for you to get and apply for funding, describing what you want to do, so the project around that. We'll also look at assessing your project, so some of this is around thinking about the impact and how we measure that, and writing the bid itself. So again, some kind of tips and hints on the bid writing process. Passion to project. So generally when we talk about funding and when we work with groups here about funding, someone will come to us with an idea and they'll say, well, we need such and such, we need this equipment to run a sports session or whatever. And what we tend to try and get groups and organizations to do is really think about, how is this a project? So a project in its entirety. So who is it for, what's it for, where is it, and what are the outcomes of it? So that's in a sense, you're kind of building more of meat around the bones basically about a project. So as we see, as we're going through some of these, a project is time limited in its sense. A project has a start, middle and an end. So again, funding will normally be for 1 year, 2 years, 6 months maybe. So you'll have a start and you'll say at the end of our project we will have achieved X, Y, Z. So that's why it's time limited. A project as well will help you to spread funds further. So again, you'll get funding for a year. So some of that then is some funding that you can use for room hire or to enable your sessions to go ahead, to pay freelance staff, etc. It also, for funders as well, gives them something else to kind of measure, in a sense of that they're not just giving money to a group to go and do a sports project, but they don't know where the sports project is or who is involved in it, and it's just chucking money at anything. They don't do that. Obviously, in some cases, a lot of this money comes from higher donors, and they have their own outcomes that they set and stipulate for each grant. So they will want to see that a sports project is working with a disadvantaged group of young people in a certain area, etc. So again, that's there, as I just mentioned, with that really, that then it's issue or needs focus. So some grants, well, many grants in fact, will stipulate that you need to work with a particular group, or you need to be able to demonstrate particular outcomes. People focused, as always. This is sometimes government money, it's community focused money. So it's going to be for people first, people led. A lot of this is public grants, so it's about funding and the impact that it has for groups and people. Impact and measurement, which we will look at later, but that in a sense is thinking about what impact does your project have? Is it going to end world hunger, or is it going to really help a group of families in, let's say, Orford to be able to access provisions for children's sports clubs, etc. Okay, so we've got an idea for our project, but now we need to kind of, as I keep saying, put the meat on the bones. So a lot of that before the project even begins and we're looking at funding is the planning element of it. So we know what project we're doing, and we know that it needs to be kind of community focused. So it's all about our community, and that's what we're going to be thinking about when we're putting this and planning this project. People in the lead, which is a lovely phrase, and again, these are public grants, so it's all about enabling and helping those people in need. Another good thing to think about is, you know, organisations and groups can't do everything. What are the constraints? What can you do and what can't you do? You've got to be realistic about when you're thinking about planning a project. It's only going to come and trip you up in the end if you say you're going to do loads of stuff, but actually you then panic and you think, where and how are we going to do this? It's not a good sign. Internal crossover within your organisations and groups. You know, do people know what they're doing? What are their roles within this? Your bank balance. Again, you're going to need to show evidence of your current bank balance. In some cases, you're going to have to submit annual accounts. So is all that in order? Have you got £1 million in the bank? If you have, then you're probably not going to get any funding. And we move on to activities. So what are you going to be doing? What's the hook? What's the thing that's going to draw you in? Think about a movie poster when you see kind of like a billboard and you're driving past, and there's always a tagline and something to draw you in. So straight off the bat you can explain something in one sentence or a few words. Right, well, I know exactly what that project is and that activity is going to do. So think about, you know, you don't have to be a marketing genius for this. It's just thinking about, can we say what it is? So does it do what it says on the tin, basically? And what are you really doing, which is a really good point, because again, you know, I'm quite bad for waffling on about stuff and umming and erring and ahhing. So it's that kind of being concise and understanding exactly what it is, and that those goalposts don't change. You know, I think a lot of funders can kind of, they read and they can get a sense of kind of the confidence within bids as well. So I read something and think, yeah, totally get that. That's exactly, I know exactly what they're going to be doing. Explaining the unique, and unique is a word that's used a lot in bids, and people use it a lot to try and really sell something that's, so why shouldn't you fund this? Well, it's a unique venue, or it's a unique project, or it's a unique session. You know, we're going to be doing ceramics using our feet. That's a bad example, but not many other people are doing it. It's not to say that there's a need for it, but it's the uniqueness of it. So why is it different? And that again comes back to the hook. What's different about this project, or what's different about this activity that sets it out from other things? And again, the funders are going to want to know that, because they're not just going to be funding the same things over and over again. Oh, it's Warrington and we've got another sports club doing a rugby session. What's unique and what's different about that? So again, it's the little nuances of things within that, and again, so it all links into kind of thinking about what you're doing. But what could be different about this project? Budget, as everyone loves a budget and loves talking about budgets and devising budgets, but this is quite an interesting one, because when you think about coming up with your budget, who wouldn't want to kind of budget for having and needing loads of money? You know, well, we're gonna need to go on a trip to Africa, really, with the group first to get to know them, and then when we come back, well, we're going to have to maybe do a couple of residentials. Do you need to do that? Can it not be that you're going to book a room out somewhere and do and do that kind of initial kind of icebreaker session with a group. So it's about listing actually what do you need, not what you want, and we'll get onto needs and wants later, but what is it actually that you need? Is it venue? Do you need specific equipment? Do you need staff? What materials do you need? Having said that as well, some of the nicer stuff, so if you think, well, if we did get the full amount, it would be nice to have this as well, or do we put that as a nice to have because if we're going to measure this project and it's working well, actually we can maybe either go back to the funder or we can apply for the other funding and develop that project. So some of those nice to haves actually become something that you might need as the project gets bigger. Splitting with different funders is sometimes something that you might think about. So your project actually might be probably 25 grand, let's say. Are you going for a specific section or portion of that fund from a local funder who maybe gives 2.5 grand, 5 grand? So you've got to think about, well, what element of that budget are we going to use for that funder? What will they fund out of that? And some people and some funders will be fine with that. They'll want to know what your total budget is and where are you going to get that money. Sometimes again that might be kind of match funded, so that's something we can help you with. Match funding will either be, so if you go for £10,000, let's say, match funding might be that a funder wants to see a 20% contribution. So if you've got money that goes towards that as well, and that match funding as well can be in kind as well, so it can be staff time, it can be room hire, that kind of stuff. Thinking about the main cost areas, so what are your big outgoings here? Are you going to be needing to hire the Wolves Stadium each Wednesday, which is very expensive, I would imagine, but what are your big outgoings? Learning from previous projects, you can research what other funders have funded in the area. You can look at other projects. You'll get a sense then of kind of what's realistic in terms of budgets for a 12-week knitting project, that kind of thing, as opposed to maybe a year-long one over multiple sites. Including financing your plans, I mean, this is pretty much what you should be thinking about in terms of your project and planning anyway. And that's not just kind of what you have now, but your forecasts as well. What have you raised so far? So you might have already done a bit of fundraising and you've got £500 towards this. Again, that all goes into this. If you think about this project has its own almost budget or its own budget code, so you've raised 500, so that goes into that budget code, or that particular budget for your knitting project. Sustainability. This again is a tricky area. We'd all like to be able to get funding and be able to budget to know that we can kind of do things for the next 6, 12, 18 months, 2 years. But you really want to be thinking about putting in your budget, what are you going to need to keep this project running? What's that look like in monetary form within your budget? Be realistic. Always be thinking about how you can reflect on what you're doing. What learning can you take from this as well? What are other people doing? There's no point reinventing the wheel. It might be that you're going to be partnering up with someone else. There's a need for this in your area, but it's actually being done, but people might not be able to travel to that area, so you might be duplicating up. So it might be always a good idea to look at what's going on. That as well will give you an idea of potentially there might be another knitting project down the road that's already had funding, and if you apply to the same funder, you've wasted not only your time but their time reading that when you could have just done a little bit of research. What do things cost? I jokingly mentioned about the Wool Stadium, but you've got to kind of be ringing round and getting quotes for things. That's always a good idea, to get at least 3 quotes for any suppliers that you might be using, any venues, any equipment you might be buying. Managing capacity versus demand. So what can you actually deliver? Again, I mentioned the analogy of going abroad to Africa, and it might actually be a feasible project because you can demonstrate a need for it. Can you do that? I'm not asking you to fly the planes, but can you get staff to go abroad? Here as well, you might be wanting to do your knitting workshops, but you don't have anyone to run the session, you don't have a venue. And also, when we talk about demand, does anyone really want to do this? I mean, the knitting stuff is great, having tried it myself, but is it really needed within that area? Or actually people already doing it, but they're going somewhere else to do it because there either wasn't a need or the demand for it within that area? So if you then start it up, are you potentially going to be drawing people back to that, or is it going to be the case that, well, you know, we just don't want to do it in this area? So quite a lot of things to think about, and it's about, you know, stepping out of the clouds in some instances and being a bit more kind of grounded and thinking, maybe we don't do this because, well, we can't, or there isn't a demand, or someone else is doing it, etc. Think about your market. Really simply, again, is there a demand for it? Where are these people? If you're going to be doing a retro games night, where are these people? How are you going to attract them? Is it that you need to do something physically in a space, or could that be online? Or there's lots of things to think about, but knowing who your target audience is really important. Project. So we get back onto people first. We'd mentioned this before in terms of thinking about your project, and that it should be people-led, people-focused. And sometimes there's a danger that you are making a project fit a particular set of stigmas or stereotypes, let's say, and you've got to be careful about pigeonholing people as well in that instance. Yes, there might be a minority group, but do they want to be pigeonholed into this group and described in this way? Describing the action, so really describing what's going to be the purpose of doing this. Collection of factors. So again, this is around understanding your audience, or I don't like to say the word market, but the people that you're going to be working with, or you're focusing this around. Have you done a lot of social research, or what are the kind of the demographics? Who's going to what project? Who are the most, if you can say, excluded? So again, it's kind of, where is that need? And as I said, throughout all of this, it might be a nice idea to do a project for a retro games night, as I'd mentioned, or a music night for a specific genre of music that people might be into. Is very nice, but is that needed, and is that wanted as well? Community. So these two elements are looking at how your bid is going to be focused. So there's two different kind of elements to this: community of locality and community of interest. So as mentioned before, it might be that the knitting group meets somewhere else. I, as a knitter, if I was that way inclined, would be looking for the knitting group, so I might kind of travel somewhere to go to that group. So it doesn't matter where I go to it. It's something I will want to find to take part in. Or is it something that I would do within a specific area? So it might be kind of like a litter pick, etc. Or that there's kind of like a shared common goal or interest within that area. So that's community of locality. So where people have something in common and the shared element is understood geographically. Whereas, as I mentioned before, the community of interest element is where people share a common characteristic other than place. They're linked together by factors such as religious belief, hobbies, sexual orientation, occupation, or cultural background. And it's good to distinguish the two, because it's again about needs and wants. One is, well, both are very much can be argued that there's a need for a specific project. The community of interest one, we could say that there's a hobbies group, the World of Warcraft type thing, painting the models type project. A lot of people have come together and set up a group online, and they want to meet to do that project. So they're coming from all over to meet to paint the models. The community of locality is also where it's very much kind of community focused. So we all come together. There's a shortage of bread. There's a shortage of bakers, let's say, and we come up with a project to kind of do a community bakery, because that's been seen that there's a need for lovely fresh artisan bread within that area. Not the best example, but I'm trying to make it kind of more jovial around being locally based or being interest based. So these coming up on screen now are just a few elements of some sentences that kind of describe impact, they describe need. They're all kind of about the outcomes will be of a project, and we'll come on to this in more detail. So we had it on the slide before was something about reducing antisocial behaviour, and we've got this cool fishbone. So when we think about outcomes, if we're reducing antisocial behaviour, there are so many elements within that before we even get to saying our project has reduced antisocial behaviour in a particular area. We will do this by offering intervention or projects within certain areas. So as you see these kind of pop up, these would be specific projects within themselves that would all potentially lead to a specific outcome potentially. So you work on tackling and combating substance misuse. Does that lead through to people becoming more aware of their actions, more kind of self-autonomy? They realise their behaviour, thus reducing antisocial behaviour. Do you do a project around providing a job path? So it might be that you're doing like an IT club, etc. Again, would lead through to one of the outcomes would be getting a job, but also it would be with that maybe person are less likely to be involved in antisocial behaviour. So an element that I very much enjoy doing a bit of research. So research basically will be the thing that backs up what you're planning to do and what your project will achieve. How do you do this? Well, there's a number of ways that you can gather research. So if your project is has some outcomes around kind of health and well-being, you'll probably be looking at the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment that Warrington and all local authorities do, and these kind of set out some key priorities and areas around health and well-being, and how they kind of meet the needs of the communities in terms of like reducing health inequalities. So there'll be lots of stats around there around kind of smoking, weight, all that kind of stuff that you could use if your project said that it was going to combat some element of health inequality. Number 2, the ONS, the Office for National Statistics. So here's where you'll kind of get more detailed data around who lives where within a particular area. So you're looking at the demographics, so you know, the age, the sex, all that kind of data around the makeup of a particular group of people in an area, which is, you know, really interesting and is needed sometimes. Great to go out and do surveys if you can, or you can do them online and do consultations. It's all well and good you thinking that there's a need for a knitting session, but have you asked anybody? Do you actually know what people want to do? It might be that you do this consultation and what comes out isn't what you thought people needed. It's actually more what people want, so really invaluable to kind of get that. And you can do them online. So you can send out surveys for people to fill in and send things back to you. You can go in to try and get more detailed information, or you can get some of the more softer kind of, you know, voices from people essentially. What do they want? Partners. Again, this goes back to looking at what is out there. Do you need anybody, or do you want anyone else, other organisations or group, to be involved in this? Funders love partnership work, purely because it maybe means that you meet more needs and you meet more people, you can cover more, there can be greater impact with a number of partners involved. History, past work, so that's not only your past work, but again within the area, what's happened before? Has this been funded before? Maybe it has and it didn't work, so why would there be need for doing it differently now? There might be. You've done that research, and if you've done the consultation, you can say, you know, this project happened in 2010 but didn't work because of this. Now there's a much greater need because these are some of the issues, and this is some of the demographic that are within this area now, so it's changed a lot. But without doing that research, you won't know kind of what's happened before. What do communities want? What do communities need? Was that Rolling Stones one? You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes you get what you need. Maybe it doesn't fit massively well to this, but we're all too well aware of you know, wanting the latest gadgets and all that kind of stuff. But what do we actually need, you know, other than shelter, food, that kind of stuff, the basics. So when we build up from that in terms of need, who are the people that aren't getting support? Where are those that are in the greatest need, and what do they actually need? You know, we're all too well and good coming up with ideas of food banks and things, but is it really? It's not necessarily what people want, is it what people need? So here's just a few as we run down kind of things that some of your participants, your members might want as opposed to need. Who doesn't want free services? Unrestricted access, someone else to do everything for them. Outings, which is probably something we'll cover in a bit about what funders will and won't fund. Equipment, maybe you want, but you might also need equipment to be able to deliver a specific session, so some of that will cross over. And then some of your needs, you know, are really powerful, life-changing, meaningful stuff. Empowerment, the tools to live, training and learning, stable, consistent spaces, understanding team, secure environments, respect, which is a big one, sense of belonging or ownership. So you can see the difference there, can't you, of just what we would determine of what's valuable. So what do we want as opposed to what do we need? People to people, people to people. So again, we mentioned about it being people first, but a lot of funders fund different things. Even though they're public funds, they might not fund things that are around specific religious activities, or, as I mentioned before, they might not fund outings, etc. So do your research, go on the website, look at what they have funded before, because they always have case studies of things that they've done before. They'll also have there on their kind of funding criteria, so you can read through that, and that's almost a bit like a checklist. If you don't meet some of their funding criteria, then there's not really much point applying to their fund. If you read it and you think, wow, where have you been all my life? This is exactly what we're kind of looking for, and this is exactly what they would fund, then you're in a good position to start the application. In some cases, if you're really keen on a specific funder, then you might have to adapt certain elements of your project to fit some of their requirements. They might want a specific outcome, or they might want to work with a specific group. Does that go against what your project is, and does that go against the need and the want of the project? So you have to think very carefully about how much you kind of adapt and tailor your projects to fit the bid. So again, exactly that. Ethically, is it the right thing to do to completely change it just because you think you can get funding for this project? And what's the application process time? So sometimes it can take a long time to pull all of this together to do your application, and it can also take a long time for funders to respond and award grants as well. In some cases up to 3 months plus, depending on who you're applying to and what you're going for. So again, that should all be kind of built into your planning of the project. You can't start next week because you need the funding to fund the project. So what's kind of like the realistic lead-in time for where you're going? Another fun elements that I like doing: SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. The same with the PEST, but that's a little wider. These are good to do before a project and at the end of a project as well, if you're looking at kind of how you redo or you shape or develop your project. But you're looking at what are the strengths of your project. So is it that you've got a great committee behind you? You've got a great team? Is it a unique idea? The weaknesses, you know, you've got to be honest with this thing as well. It's a really good process to try and go through with some of your members, get people involved if you're going to look at doing a SWOT, because your weaknesses might essentially be the things that shape some of your bid. The venue isn't suitable is a massive thing, and is a great weakness to this actually really being a thriving project. Opportunities are limitless, are endless, but they're also good to kind of put down because they're in some cases, some of the things that you might not have thought about. You could work with another partner. Someone else is doing something similar. So it's a great opportunity to partner up potentially. Threats, again, you've got to be honest with this. So the threat could be, if you don't get the funding, then this project can't take place. So then that makes you think about, well, what do we put in place to try and mitigate against that, or can we adapt something, or it all helps to kind of help with that continual development, rather than just thinking, right, well, we're going to put this funding bid in and we'll get the funding and everything will be great and we'll do this project and that's it. So if you don't get the funding, what do you do? When the funding ends, what do you do? So these are really good kind of tools to work through. The same with the pest, but that's giving you a broader kind of political, economic, social kind of viewpoint on some of the things that you might need or that might impact on your project. So a good idea, now we've got our project, we've got it all planned out, is to really start kind of making some notes and getting down some thoughts on paper. This will help when you come to actually writing the bid. So we've got here about reducing jargon. Lots of people, well, still do, but in terms of writing bids, used to use a lot of buzzwords and jargon, a lot of words that were, you know, things around inclusivity, or although we see a lot of the minute around kind of self-isolation and things like that. But what do those words mean? So think about reducing some of the jargon. Again, keep thinking about people first. Yes, they might be socially isolated, but what is that isolation to them, to that group that you're working with? Can you explain that in a different way? Acronyms are terrible, but they're useful because they save space and characters. Sometimes if you're writing your bid, you might only have a certain amount of characters, so writing down Warrington Borough Council takes up a lot of characters. You write WBC, great, but as a funder, you're going to know what WBC means, so you might have to explain that acronym, but then you can use it again. So that's a good way of kind of keeping your word count down if you've got a lot of stuff to put in your bids. Including their priorities and criteria. You've read the funding criteria, you know what they're doing, what they want. Include some of those words within your bid as well. Show your organisation's personality, and that's also around the voice. So gone are the days really of generic bids that were written by freelance bid writers, although they still exist. A lot of funders now really want to see and hear the group's personality come through in the bid. So don't worry about necessarily about your grammar and using big fancy words. They want to hear your voice through it, and some of that is about being proud but not being too arrogant about what you do and how well you do something. Yes, you should be shouting about yourselves, but think about how it might sound to other people reading it. Make it sparkle and stand out. Again, this comes back to that, what's unique? And when you were thinking about marketing and selling this, how are you going to say that it's something different? How's it going to stand out from another bid? So a few nice little tips and hints. We mentioned before about kind of that process time of from coming up with your project, planning, writing the bid, and then submitting the bid. This bit of writing the bid is really important, to kind of take your time and really stop and think about what it is that you're writing, basically. Be aware of the word count. So when you're doing your applications online, some of them will stop. They won't let you type past 400 words. Some of those, when you're filling out forms, when you're handwriting forms, you need to be careful of that. Some other times they won't stop your word count, but you will be penalised if you go over word counts. Also, don't worry about filling up the word count. I get this a lot of people just end up waffling just to get to 400 words. If you can say something really concisely in 200 words, then just use 200 words. It doesn't matter. Never assume they know who you are. Again, comes back to that kind of the confidence of you writing that bid, but explain a bit about who you are. They read hundreds of bids, and maybe quite a lot of the same stuff. So explain who you are, explain what you do. Don't shoehorn in extra information. So again, this is just around some of the word count stuff, but some of the relevance was great to kind of give them a little bit of your backstory. They don't want War and Peace on kind of you and where you've come from and all that kind of stuff. Yes, it's about selling what you do, and some of that is about the journey, obviously, but just be a bit selective. Keep it on task, stay relevant with kind of what you're saying. Less is more in this instance. It's really hard getting knocked back and getting that letter or the email saying sorry on this occasion that your bid's been unsuccessful. Try not to take things too personally. It does hurt. You know, you put a lot of time and effort into writing your bids, but there can be so many factors that go against you. One of those depends on deadline day. There's, you know, a lot more people submitting bids. It could be based on the panel. So, you know, we fortunately here sit on some of the local regional funders, so we get a good insight into kind of what's being funded. So we know kind of some of the areas where they may favour certain bids, etc. And it could also be some of the knowledge base on that panel as well. They're just reading bids and applications blind in a lot of cases. So the more they know about a bid, it might be that, oh, they've not quite explained it this way, but actually we know this project or this group and they do really good stuff. So some of it can be that as well. You know, need is different throughout the whole country, and also regionally and locally as well. It could just be that there were other bids that met that need particularly of the funder, or they met a need that was greater than the one that your project is going to achieve. Funders also think about risk to themselves as well. It could be that there was an element that they were unsure about your bid, or they do a lot of digging into kind of finance and financial management, and sometimes that can kind of raise some red flags or some areas of concern about how well that might be governed, the group, or there may be issues around certain policies and procedures that they don't feel are kind of quite right, or need some work on. So again, a lot of factors involved in that. So here's a few things to look out for, and if you kind of are doing any of these or you've done any of these, then the chances are there's only yourself to blame for this unsuccessful bid reply. Timing of the bid versus timing of the project. We mentioned this before about if you're saying that your project starts tomorrow, but the bid, if successful, wouldn't be granted for another 3 months, then the funders are going to think, well, if you needed this funding to run the project and start the project, how come you can do it for 3 months without funding? So some of that doesn't look good. So think about when the deadline of the submission is, realistically when the start of the project should be. So if they say that they have a 3 month turnaround, you should be looking at 3 months plus from that for when your project would start. Missing or dismissing deadlines. Some online applications won't let you submit after 5 PM on a specific date if that's the deadline. Others will, but you probably won't even get considered because it's late. Think about being at school, handing in homework or essays late. Doesn't look good. Writing negatively, so again, it's just that language. If it hasn't come across well, our funder's going to be confident that you're going to be the right group or organisation to run that project. Are you going to have the passion? Are you demonstrating the passion that you have for that project, or is it just a, oh well, you know, there's a need for this and we'll do it? Well, someone else has put in a bid and they're really passionate about it, so we'll give the money to them instead. Don't make up substantiated claims. So this is where your research and your consultation is key, really. If you're writing a bid cold and you're making wild claims about, well, I know there's a need for this because I live in here and such, and Joe down the road said that they need a knitting group, so you know we've definitely got to do it. You know, you can't back any of that up. Underselling the organisation, that fine line of not saying too much and not being too confident, but if you're not giving a good account of your organisation, of your group, then again, what's a funder going to think about how best placed you are to really deliver that? And likewise, don't over exaggerate. It's all well and good kind of writing some, you know, narrative and some backstory to why this project is needed, but if you just keep going on and on and on about it, yeah, again, it looks kind of, doesn't look very favourable. And again, it could look that you're filling words up or you're just waffling. Grammar and spelling, maybe not sure too much about this because as I'd mentioned, funders do like to hear that voice, and some of that voice obviously in an application comes across in the written form. Just be a little bit more mindful about how that might look. You won't necessarily be unsuccessful if your grammar and spelling isn't up to a national standard, etc. But again, yeah, it doesn't look great sometimes. Again, this will all seem like we've covered it before and all seem obvious, but it's about just taking your time. It's about making sure you've proofread it, give it to someone else to read. We offer what we call kind of a critical eye service at WVA, so we can proofread your bids for you. We can help really kind of give you that panel perspective. So we'll ask some of the questions potentially of your application that funders might need some clarification on. There might be elements of your budget or your timescales that are just not quite right. So, you know, really essentially you either us or you get someone else to proofread it. Getting some support throughout. Again, we've mentioned places to get stats, etc. It's a bit of a minefield if you've not done it before. We can help you with that. All you need to do is kind of ask. That goes with the same with the research. And I think with anything, you know, give it the time that it deserves. Would you give someone an A star if they'd just done like a really quick last minute piece of work? It might be great, but Is it achievable? Probably not. Monitoring. The fun elements of finishing a project. So within the bid, and again within the funding criteria, many of the stipulations for awarding grants from funders will be that you are able to demonstrate the impact and the outcomes of your project. So you're going to have to monitor, you're going to have to keep records of, it might be attendance, or it might be charting somebody's journey through the project, to give those outcomes to the funder in a report at the end, so you can say, look at this. Likewise, even if it doesn't, it shows that you've still been monitoring it, and there might be some other reasons behind the journey of your project over that time, and it didn't work because of this. But as long as you can demonstrate that, that's what funders will want to see. So do you have suitable information gathering methods? How do you collect your data from people? Are you doing registers? Are you doing surveys? Are you taking photos, etc.? Do you have the skills, or know where to find them, hello WVA, to analyze the information? So you get all this data, but what are you supposed to do with it? How are you supposed to pull that into a report to say, well, you know, Charlie attended for X amounts of weeks, and we've got some surveys in between about where he was at the beginning and where he was at the end. So we're charting that journey, but we need to just really work out and evidence what that journey means as an outcome at the end. Monitoring. They might want things submitted halfway through. Sometimes they'll stipulate that to get the second half of your funding, you need to provide a report midway, or they will want it by a certain date at the end of a project. So it's always good to kind of double check that. It might be a year, 2 years down the line, so you're going to need to keep a note of it. Yay! You've managed to get some funding. Super made up for you. Well done. The next stages are just as important as writing it, and this is all about the relationship that you are hopefully able to develop with the funders. But first and foremost, rejoice, show everyone the letter, but then you need to sign it and return it, and sometimes you'll also have to get one of your board members or trustees to sign that as well and get that back to them. Part of building those bridges as well is about just saying thanks. You're over the moon, it's great, so tell them that as well. Have a look at where they might want their logos on flyers, leaflets, on your website. They'll have specific branding guidelines of where they want stuff. You can get in touch with us. We've got a Get Connected, a digital support. So Joe here can help you with looking at downloading all those logos, where they go on your website, all that kind of stuff. Invite them to visit, you know, get them down. You're absolutely buzzing about this funding. It's going to make such an impact, so get them to come down and have a look at it. They might not. If they're a local funder, they probably will. They love coming to see stuff like that. And again, it helps build that relationship. You know, they've read this application, they know what you're doing, then they come and see you, so those dots are connected. So next time that you apply, you stand in such better stead because they already know who's delivering it. They can go straight away, wow, yeah, went down there, absolutely amazing. Oh, they're looking to do this. Yeah, great. Make sure you complete your reports, as was mentioned with the monitoring. With all of it, they might not release funding midway through if you don't submit the midway point reports or reviews. The same with the funding at the end as well. Tell them about your issues or successes. It's all about keeping communication with the funders. You know, you may have got funding and then all of a sudden, wow, something like COVID happens and you can't run the project the way you were going to, or you need to push the start date back. They're really open to kind of moving the goalposts if you tell them about it. If you don't, and then all of a sudden they get a report at the end and you've suddenly spent it on loads of other stuff, again, how does that look? So just keep that communication up with them. Likewise, any problems throughout, just let them know. They're giving out public money to make the biggest impact, so they want to know, and they can help as well if that's the case. And that is the end of bid writing. There are loads of resources on our website that will help you go through step by step, so you can look at more in-depth detail of actually submitting bids online and the process for that. We can also help with funding searches, so when you've got your project idea, get in touch, we can have a chat about it, and we can help you match up with the most suitable funders, and all the way through your project and all the way through your group. We can provide support, we can read through your bids for you. You're not alone with this. It is a big task, but ultimately if you've got a project that is really needed, then we can hopefully really make that successful with some additional funding if that's required. Thanks again, and see you soon.